So Jordan Peterson is arguing that we have to have a God, this higher morality coming from a God, otherwise we'll be evil. What else do we have to keep us in line and make us behave ourselves? And here he gives this case from fiction about how a person questioning the belief in God thinks that he can get away with murder.
He goes to a pawnbroker to pawn his meager possession so that he can continue to scrape by. And she has this niece, I believe it's her niece, that's not very bright, who she basically treats as a slave and is horrible to. And so the pawnbroker has this money. Raskolnikov is in dire need. He thinks, look, I'll just kill her, because why the hell not? I'll take her money. She's not doing any good with it anyways. I'll free her niece, who's just lurking as a slave. She's got all these other people tangled up in her pawnbroker schemes. All that'll happen is the world will be a better place. And the only thing that's holding me back is conventional moral cowardice. And, you know, Dostoevsky has his character in Crime and Punishment go through days, hours and days and weeks of intense imagination about this, rationalization about this, trying to justify himself, placing himself outside the law so that he can perpetrate this act, and telling himself with all the best nihilistic arguments that the only possible thing that could be holding him back is an arbitrary sense of indoctrinated morality. And so Dostoevsky explores that. He does commit the murder, and then of course all hell breaks loose because things don't necessarily turn out the way that you want. He gets away with it, however. Well, he gets away with it technically because no one knows he did it. But he doesn't get away with it in relationship to his own conscience. And so the rest of the book explores that. Well, Dostoevsky, I believe it was in Crime and Punishment, although he makes the same point in many of his books, he makes a very fundamental point. And this is the kind of point that I think that people who haven't investigated these matters down this particular literary and philosophical pathway never grapple with. Dostoevsky said straightforwardly, if there's no God, so if there's no higher value, let's say, if there's no transcendent value, then you can do whatever you want.
But Peterson seems to be unaware of what he's just told people. It was the conscience of this Dostoevsky character. It was his conscience. It was the horrible consequences of his murderous act that he took in desperation to improve himself and those he loved, and only had to kill an extremely evil, horrible person. Even then, his conscience bothered him. I don't know this story, but as it is being told by Jordan Peterson, God doesn't punish him. God doesn't send him to hell. It is even in this story that you've cherry-picked to try to prove your point that you need God to create justice. It isn't God that punishes him. He's not going to hell for his murder. He is suffering the consequences of a human conscience. And the Bible, the Christian theology, says that if he gives his life to Jesus, asks for forgiveness after committing this homicide, he'll go to heaven. So how is this story propping up the idea that we need a God to be moral? The very story that you've picked out that was created to try to prove this point does not prove that very point. And here is Frank Turek telling us how it is necessary for God to be a judge of sin. Why does he have to punish sin?
God is not just love, but he's also justice. Which is why, by the way, Jesus had to come. Because if he was just all love, borderless, in the sense that he never judged sin, then he wouldn't be God, because God is the standard of all the moral virtues, including justice. So in order for unjust people like you and me to not be punished, he has to punish somebody else who's innocent and who's voluntarily going to get the punishment, so we won't get that punishment. So he punishes basically himself. That way God remains just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. This is what the Apostle Paul says in Romans chapter 3, verse 26. So God is loving, and he's also just. Do you know there's a Yale religion professor, his name is Miroslav Volf. He grew up in Czechoslovakia. He saw all sorts of atrocities committed by the government on his people. And at one point he was mad about a God who would make judgments. You know what he says now? After seeing those atrocities, I couldn't worship a God who didn't judge sin. I couldn't worship a God who would turn the other way and never punish those evildoers. I mean, if a judge has a murderer come before him and the judge knows he's guilty, and then the judge says, I love you, you can go, is that judge just? Is that a good judge?
So this man who has witnessed these horrible atrocities says he would not worship a God who won't judge the men who committed these atrocities. And yet, that's exactly what the Christian God is. Someone who will not punish these communists or Nazis or whoever it was that committed these particular atrocities in Czechoslovakia sometime. Instead, he's going to tell them, if you join the club, become a Christian, I'll forgive your sins, and I won't punish you, no matter how many people you kill. Do you not understand that this is the core of Christianity? You will not be punished for your sins. You will be punished for not joining the religion. Join the religion, and you can be as evil as you want to. Don't join the religion. You're the one going to hell. And these two semi-famous Christian apologists don't seem to grasp that their religion does not do what they're saying a God needs to do. Punish bad, reward good. If these guys were selling karma, that would be a good argument for karma, or a works-based salvation. A little punishment for a little bad, a big punishment for a lot of bad. That's not Christianity, and they seem to be oblivious to that fact. The core of Christianity is punishing an innocent man for other people's sins, and if you join the religion, your sins are forgiven.